So for the constructors, I'll start a new project where in that new project I want us to discuss, or we are creating an employee record, something small like an employee record. So Java, just watch before you do. So I'll create an employee project. I'll not create a main class. So that's the name of the employee project. And yesterday we discussed packages. And I said packages are nothing but what? Logical groupings of what? Related classes. So at the moment, and usually all your code should go into the source package. At the moment, I don't have anything in the source package. And you can see there's a default package here. Always avoid to place any code in the default package. It's not advisable. If you put it there, you'll not get any error, but don't do it. So I'll first create my package. Then employee, and the package, the naming I said is what? The reverse what? Domain. All should be lowercase. So com.aiti underscore case dot employee. So first, the first three initials for what? The kind of organization or the kind of institution. Then the name of the project you are working on before you come to the particular division of the project. So maybe you want to do under the employee, you want to do maybe staff details or staff record. So under the staff record part. Now under the staff record, so this is my package. I first want to create an employee class. So I'll create an employee class. I'll name the class employee. Note, this name and the name of the package has nothing to do with it. I'm just using the same name. So employee class. Then automatically Net will generate this comment for us. So this is my class. And you can see the package up there. Yesterday we discussed the order of the sequence. The package name, import statement before the what? The class. If you swap them, you get error. If you swap them. So for the employee, yesterday we talked about some core. A class are made up of what? Static variable, instance variable, class method, instance method, static block, and what? Non-static block, and constructor. Today our focus will be on a constructor. And we said a constructor is a what? A special kind of method. And its duty is to what? Create what? Object for us. And the syntax for creating a constructor is just like what? A method signature. But it doesn't have what? 1 and what? 5. Where 1 is the what? The method type. And 5 is the what? The return type. So and another thing is that the name of the constructor should be the same as the what? The name of the class. So I'll create an employee. So this is my constructor. And this constructor, we call it default constructor. Or parameterized constructor. Non-parameterized constructor. Non-params. You can see there's no parameter here. So we call it default constructor. And any class that you create by default automatically gets a default constructor, whether you put it there or not. So if I even eliminate this and I create an instance of this class, I'll still use what? The default constructor in creating an object. Now, I always try to use this. Let me create a test class to test my classes. So I'll create another class, test, and it will be in the same package. Then this one, I'll give it public static void main. Let me explain this public static void main. This public static void main, as we said in Java, every code should exist in what? Within a class. You can't write any code outside a class. So if you're coming from a different language like C or Objective-C, I could have just written the int main method somewhere and I'll call another class. But in Java, it should be in a class. Now, the main method in most of the languages or generic languages, is the entry and the exit point of every application. Before your application can run, you need the what? The main method. Let me demonstrate it by going back to the employee. When I right click, run file, I'll get an error. com.this.date does not have a what? A main method, so I can't run it. So it is the entry and the exit point of every application. Now when I come here, I right click, run file, it will run perfectly. And what I run, and it will compile and run at the same time. At the moment, you are not displaying anything, so it will run just like that and go away. So that's it. But let me first comment these guys. Then in the comment, let me just delete it so that you know there's nothing here. So I have an empty class, just an employee. I don't have anything in the class. And in normal circumstances, if I'm creating an instance of the class, where an instance means what? An object of the class, or the result of the class, or a product of the class. That's how I go by it. First, the name of the class. So our class is what? Employee. And yesterday I said when you are naming your classes, the convention is that you capitalize what? Each word. Then you do what? You try and use singular plurals. Don't use singular nouns. Don't use plurals for your nouns because you are taking one employee. So employee, then maybe M is equal to new employee. Now let me explain this. Yesterday I wanted to explain this. This one here, this line. Let me comment it from the top. This here is the name of the class. Class name. This is the class name. I mean this part. Then this one here. Reference. A reference of type. A reference. You just say a reference. Then this one here. The new keyword. This is the only place you use it. It's used to create an instance of a class. So anytime you use the new keyword, a memory block is allocated for that object. So this new is creating the object on heap. So this line here is what does the actual object creation. This line here does the actual object creation. And object creation is nothing but what? It's just like a variable declaration. You are telling the compiler that reserve a memory space for me and expect items of type what? Employees. So that's what the new employee is doing. So it's creating the object. So anytime you see new, a name of a class, parenthesis, then you terminate it. And this here is what we call a constructor. You can see at the moment I don't have any method in this class, but I'm able to call what? This constructor. And a class name or a constructor, as we said, should be the same name as what? The class. If the parameter is empty, then it becomes the what? The default what? Constructor, or the parameterized constructor, the non-parameterized constructor. So this is a default constructor. And anytime you see new, the name of the class, normal brace, then you terminate it. That's where you create the object. So this is the object. Now this employee here is a reference of type employee. It's just a reference. It is not an object. If I just create employee emref like this, this is a reference. Just a reference of type employee. A reference of type employee. It doesn't have any life. You know, the references are just like aliases. And when you read other books, you usually get confused because we usually interchange the reference and the what? The object. They are two different things. The reference points to an object, and the object has the memory allocation, or it has life. The reference has it's just a name something, but it doesn't exist. It's waiting to point to someone. It's waiting to reference someone, but at the moment it doesn't reference anyone. So at this point, this reference is empty. It doesn't have any life. But this employee reference here has a life because it's pointing to what? New employee. It's pointing to this new employee object. So this is the object. And usually that's what we do. The reference names an object. So you can see, normally when I say new employee, I'm creating a memory space, stuff, all those stuff in the memory, but no one has named it. So if you want to reuse a particular object, that's where the references comes in. It helps us to reuse what? Object being created. So I've created an employee object, then I create this reference. Then now I can reuse this object as many times as I call this reference, because anytime I say employee, it refers to what? The new object. Anytime I call employee, it refers to what? The new object. So this is a class name, this is a reference. And with the referencing, when I use this reference up here, at the moment, as I said, there's no life in it. So when I try to use it, compile time to not complain, but during runtime it to complain because this reference does not have what? Life, or it doesn't refer to any object. It's just a dummy what? Reference name. It doesn't refer to any object. So you usually get null pointer exception. So anytime you get null pointer exception, the first thing that should come into your mind is check your references. When I say a reference, their class name is just like a variable declaration. But this time it's what? Higher object. It's no longer what? Primitive types. You know what primitive types are? It's no longer primitive types. So there's a constructor. Let me just focus on the constructor. By default, we get this. Now, that's what I'll do. I'll try and the empref there. I'll try and point you to new employee class and try to pass maybe name here. Name here. Look at the error I'm getting. The constructor employee in class employee cannot be applied to the given types. It requires no argument, but it's found what? Strings. So within our employee class, we've not created any constructor, but by default, we get a default constructor for every class. By default, there's a but to it when you not get the default constructor, but by default you get it. I'm trying to call another constructor with what? A parameter, and it's telling me that it doesn't exist. It's expecting no what? Argument constructor. And now that I've pointed this guy to an object, we now have two separate what? Objects in memory, being referenced by two different what? References. So when you have to read this code, when I'm to read this programmatically, I'll just say within the public static void main, which helps our program to run. Without it, the program will not run. It's the entry and exit point of every application. This is what? A reference of type what? Employee. At the moment, there's no life in it because it doesn't point to any object, or it doesn't have a memory space. Then the second one, I create an employee. This one points to what? A real object in what? In memory. This is the object creation. Then there's another one. It also points to what? Another object. So you now have two different what? Objects. How do you know that? Let me save it. Then I'll bring back the default constructor. I'll bring back the default constructor. I'll bring back the default constructor, and I'll just put default sita. Sita means constructor here. So I'll just display something. Now when I come here and I run this code, I'm expecting what? Two default sita in the console. You can see what? Default sita what? Default sita. Each one creates what? A new what? A new object. So this employee here at the moment there's no what? Object. But when it comes here, it gets an object. Let me comment this guy and run it again. This time we get only one. You will get only what? Default sita, because the empref there is what? Not pointing to what? Any object at the moment. So that's the default constructor. is provided automatically when the class does not have any constructor, but you can override it yourself by providing it, like in this case. Then now that you've provided a default constructor, there are times one will ask what is the use of the constructor. Sometimes when you are creating an object, you want the object to have some needs. So you specify something that we need, assuming the employee object. I want to take the employee name, employee ID, employee date. You will follow the employee properties. I don't know if not that, let me just do it. So every employee has a name, so we have this default constructor. Now with the constructors, this time an employee, I want the employee to have what? A name. So I'll just say string name. That will be the name of the employee. Then employee will have an ID. So I'll just say int ID. That will be the ID of the employee. Assuming the ID is just integers. Then employee have maybe salary range. So that one to, let me just say date of birth. So employee has a name, an ID, and what? Date of birth. As what? These are what? Instance what? Variables, because there's no static keyword in front of it. And being instance means that each object will have its own what? Copy. So these are the what? Instance variables. Now when I come down here, anytime I create an employee object, I want it to have these three properties by default. So once you are creating an object, I will ask you to provide these values. So I'll create a constructor to do that. I want to initialize any object that I create as an employee. So I'll create another constructor, employee. Then this time, instead of being empty, I'll be expecting string name, string ID. Then that's not string, that's int ID, then string DOB, date of birth. So you can see I now have a constructor that takes three parameters. Parameters means it needs three hops in order for this method to work. Just know that your constructor is a special kind of method. And you can see this one, there's no public in front of this one, but it's still a constructor. At the moment, just ignore the access specifier, so we'll discuss them later. So you have this constructor, and that's what I want to do. This name here, let me get a full screen. This name here, this name and this name, you can see there's color changes in them. One is black and one is green. It tells you that this is a local variable. This is a local variable, and it's local to that employee constructor. I said under normal circumstances, all local variables should exist within curly braces. But when it comes to methods, it's not just curly braces. The parentheses are also local to that block. So this guy here are local. That's why you have different colors, even though you are using the same name. So you have different colors, even though you are using the same name. So that's what I want to do. Anytime I create an employee object, I'll just say name is equal to name. There will be a conflict because I'm assigning this to itself. I have this name here, This is at the class level. Class level. And if I want to access anything at the class level, you have a special keyword. You call it this reference. This reference. It will refer to what? Anything within the class. So I want to say this name should be equal to what? This name. So that's what I'll do. This dot name should be equal to name. So that's what I'll do. Anytime I call this, I'll come with a name. Then I'll take the name and I'll put the name what? Here. Anytime I call this, I'll come with an ID. I'll take the ID and put the ID what? Here. And because the name here and the name here are different, that's why I use the this keyword here. I could have just, let me just do the ID. This dot ID is equal to ID. So this one also set this to this. Then date of birth is equal to DOB. You can see I didn't use any this keyword in front of this. I could have used it. I didn't use any this keyword because there's only one date of birth, so there will not be any conflict. It will know that if it doesn't exist, I'll pick the what? The class level. But when it came to the name, when I removed this, it was still referring to what? The local one. So I have to specify which one I want this one to be equal to this. And note the equal sign here means what? Put whatever is here into this. So I'm taking the name which is coming and I'm inserting into the one at the class level. So I'll take this and put it here. So now we have one parameterized constructor. One parameterized constructor. So param constructor. One parameterized constructor. Now let's see how we use it. So I'll go to my test employee here. Here, I still have what? An employee reference up here. This is also what? A reference. This time, I want the employee reference to be equal to what? Or you just note, anytime you are creating this, I'm teaching you the shortcut of the NetBeans. As you are using it here, I want to create a reference. I want this one to point to an object. I'll just type what? New and the name of the what? The class I want to create. So employee. For NetBeans, you just press Control space. Then it will list all the available what? Constructors for you. At the moment we have two. The default one and the what? The parameterized one. The default one and what? The parameterized one. So I want to choose the parameterized one. When I choose, it's asking for what? The parameters. Here you just pass the values. You don't go and type in string int ID. No, you just pass the values. So it's telling you it's expecting what? A string name. So I'll just say maybe coffee. And ID is an integer. So 23. Then the date of birth. So I've created an object what? Employee ref, which has these attributes. The name is Kofi, the ID is 23, and the date of birth is what? 2013. This employee one up here, or this normal employee, let me add one to this. Employee one doesn't have any attributes at the moment because it uses the what? The default constructor. And the default constructor does not specify what? Any what? Does not do any initialization. It doesn't say your age is this, your ID is this, your this is this. So it's just displaying. So now let me just sys out another. So this is not default, this is what? Params. Parameterized constructor. I will save it. Then we'll run it again. You can see default constructor and what? Param constructor. So you can see that we are calling two separate constructors because of the object we created. Now look at something. I'll comment. You know about comment. I'll comment this default constructor. I'll comment it in NetBeans. You can just select it and click on this guy to comment it for you. If you want to uncomment, you click on it to uncomment it for you. So I'll comment it. I'll save it. Then when I come here, I get an error. It's telling me that employee constructor employee in the class employee cannot be applied at given types. It requires string, int and what? String. But it found no argument. I told you that anytime you create a class, by default you get what? The parameterized constructor. But there are situations where you will not get. And this is one of them. If your class contains just one parameterized constructor, you lose that privilege of getting the what? The default constructor. So if you create your own parameterized constructor, then you must also create your own what? Default constructor. The default constructor you get by default is assumed that maybe you've forgotten to provide any constructor. Then that one will be provided for you. But immediately you start providing your own constructor, then you must also provide the what? The default constructor. You lose that what? Privilege. So that's how you are getting this error. So in order to remedy that, you have to what? Uncomment our what? Parameter the default constructor so that we can create an instance of it. So this is a constructor. I said this keyword here, or this reference, or however you call it, when you are within a class, anytime I use this, it means look inside a class. There's something of this nature, call it for me. And that thing, you know the composition of a class, the instance member, class variables, methods, and all those stuff. Anytime you use the this, you are calling any of them, but the this works on only two of them. It works on instance variables and instance methods. It doesn't work on class variables and class methods. Where class variables and class methods are what? Static variables and static what? Methods. So assuming I had string, let me just use double. Let me make this one static. Accepting it, but I wanted to show something. But you let me not go there now. I will introduce it when you are doing the static methods. Just note, I use this keyword because this name here already exists within what? This class. So in order to specify which one I'm talking to, this dot name refers to the one at the what? Class level, whilst this name refers to what? The local variable. So that's one way of using the what? The this keyword in constructors, and you see them a lot. Once you are here, you see them a lot. So now you have two main constructors. There are situations where a class can have thousands of constructors, and you will like to, maybe one constructor is starting something, another is doing another thing, another is topping up. So I'm a constructor, I'm interested in what constructor one is doing, and I want to call it and use it. There's a way around it. This is what I mean. I know this class, I know this is a default constructor, so I have this default constructor, and this is what the default constructor does. It set this to maybe default, set this to default, id to 0, then date of birth to date. The default constructor is doing just initializing the what? These values to what? Initial values. And within this parameterized constructor, before I even set whatever is coming to the existing ones, I want to make sure this guy has cleared the memory or has set these values to the default before I do that. So assuming I want to call this constructor to do whatever it's doing here, before I do it, this is how to go about it. use the same this keyword, this, but this time you don't say dot. The dots in Java or in OOP concept, this is what you say. You have object A and object B. If they want to talk to each other, or different class, if they want to talk to each other, they send messages, and that messages are true in the form of public methods or public what variables. So anytime you see that dot, it means I'm calling a what, either a method or what, a public field, or it could be, depends on where you are, it could be a private field, depends on where you are. So this here, when I say this and I do this, this one here is calling the default constructor. So this one here is calling the what, the default constructor what, up there. What do I mean by that? Let me come here, I'll comment this guy, and you have only what, employee ref, and this employee ref is calling the what, the parameterized constructor. And then in normal circumstance, it should just, before even I do this, let me comment this guy and come back here, save it, then run it. It runs successfully. Then we get what, params what, constructor. So you know it's only the what, the parameterized constructor which is what, working, because this is the display here. It's only this one which is working. Now I want to call the default constructor before I do whatever I want to do in my parameterized constructor. To do that, you just use the what, the this. Then note this is how it's being followed. It's being followed by what, the structure of your what, the default constructor. If it's default, there's nothing in the what, the parentheses. So this means call the default constructor to do whatever I want it to do. I'll save the same code, come back and run it. This time it calls the what, default before the what, parameter. The default is being called by the power of what, this keyword. So I'm showing you two uses. One takes, is just like a method call. This is how you call a method. This is how you call a method. The name of the method, parenthesis, then terminate it. So I'm just calling a method, and just note, constructor is what, a special kind of what, method. Don't forget that. So this is calling the what, the default what, constructor. And there's a rule. Anytime you are using this, it must be the first statement in that constructor. Anytime you are using this, it must be the first statement in the what, the constructor. If I move this guy and bring it down, I should get an error. I've not changed anything, I just what, change the position. And what does error tell me? Call to this must be the first statement in the what, constructor. So you have an intelligence ID that will be helping you along the line. So I just revert it back to the original state. So it must always be the what, the first statement in the what, a constructor. So we've now seen how to create a constructor, how to call one constructor within the same class using the what, the this keyword. Then we've also seen another use of the this keyword, where you have two variable names of the same name. And you want to specify which one is this and which one is this. Or you have a local variable here, the same name as the what, an instance variable. Then you want to specify whether you are talking to the instance variable or you are talking to the local variable. You use the this keyword to specify that. I'll create a third constructor, employee, a third constructor. But this time I'll take only one parameter, just the name. Then I'll say, I'll just take just the name. Now in this class, let me just do some, this dot name is equal to name. This dot name is equal to name. Assuming I want to call this second constructor or the 3 argument constructor in the 1 argument constructor, how do I go by it? I'll just use what, this, right, this, then I'll open it. The second argument constructor takes what, 3 arguments. So I need to provide what, the 3 what, arguments. So I'll just, and this one is required, so I'll just say name, comma. The other two I don't have it, so I'll just provide some static values for it. So you can see this is calling what? This guy. It is calling this guy. Then let me sys out again here so that you know the cascaded distance within one arg setter, one argument constructor. I'll save it. Then when I come here, I'll comment this guy too. Then I'll create a new object, employee one arg object or one arg object. So got new. Immediately I type the employee, you can see now you have what? 3 options instead of what? 2. I want to use the what? The second load. And these options you call them overloads. You have 3 overloads of the constructor. You have 3 overloads. I want to use the second one. I'll pass the value to it. So when I come here, the same when I run it, I'm expecting, you can see it's what? Default constructor, parameterized constructor, and what? With one what? Arg constructor. So this guy, the one is calling the what? The 3 one. And the 3 is calling the what? The empty one. So whichever, and the other is, you can see we call this one first before we call this one, before this one. So this one calls this one calls this one calls this. So it's cascaded what? Calls. Constructors. And you can't return, you know that there's no return type in constructor. There's no method type. It's just the what? The name of the class. So it's usually used to do some validation. Assuming I want to check that the salary or the ID of the employee cannot be greater than a particular what? Range. You do all those things here. So within here, I'll just do some logic here that if even here I'm not taking an ID, so I'll just come to the second one. Before I set the value of this one, I'll just say if ID is greater than 10, set it. If the ID is greater than 10, do it to this. Else display your ID is below range. Your ID is below range. So that's what I'm just trying to do. I'll take an ID, then I'll check if the ID is greater than 10. I'll set you to the word ID. So usually do this is what you do in the constructors. If you have some checks that you want to check, maybe you have a form filled, people are entering their name, you want to do some validations, you do all those things in your what? Your constructor. So you take the values, you validate before you even go and do other methods. So let's test this one and see. So I will uncomment this. I'll comment this and uncomment this, and let the statement be false. So now 3 is not greater than what? 10. So we are expecting the false part. It calls this one. Then your ID is below what? Range before it displays this. So I'm telling you some of the uses of what? The constructors for your validations, initializations, and other stuff. So that's the use of the constructors.